Man, this is not my call today. I am pretty excited, though. I will give a huge props to Wyatt and Benjamin today. What Wyatt has been building since we started this journey together is nothing short of pure genius and on invention. And a lot of the visions that we talked about when I met Wyatt in 2017, I thought were crazy and bogus around moving energy off the power grid, rewarding and incentivizing different systems, autonomous vehicles talking. And it was always like, why? How does it happen? It's like, oh, well, this whole decentralized world could actually make something really possible. But the technology is an absolute joke. And, from there, it was kind of opening up my mind to merging or converging the world of big data into the decentralized world. And we're actually getting to that point today. And we saw this announcement yesterday that Benjamin, behind the scenes for the past couple of years, have been writing a standard in autonomous vehicles on how machines communicate, which was what Wyatt envisioned 3 years ago and is building that framework to have that happen. So I'll shut up now because these two individuals are going to converge both the business side and technology side of what we've been building. So I'll leave it over to you guys. Hopefully that was a decent intro.
It was a decent intro. Appreciate it, Ben. Thanks, buddy. And appreciate the props. This has been, as you well know, a lot of work. A lot of frustration, a lot of times where we're like, why have we gone this deep into this thing? But to your point there is that it really is part of a larger vision. I'm really excited because my goal here is not just to talk about how badass Constellation is, but to excite everybody and give them some knowledge to share with people in their social circles. I understand there's a lot of high-tech folks here that understand the crypto space, but I'm really passionate about the world that I'm calling the normies, the people that don't really know what crypto is, or they know Bitcoin because everybody does, but they're not really tuned in to the possibility of what this is unlocking. And as you can imagine, I'm constantly trying to educate folks, but I think that if I can embody this one-to-many approach and hopefully, educate everyone that's tuned in here on this topic, they have stuff they can share with others and get people really excited about kind of the commercial adoption of this. So before I get started, I do want to give some shout outs. And just as far as the way that this is going to go, I'm going to handle the first probably majority of this, 60% of this presentation, then hand it over to Wyatt to jump into some technical questions we have and talk a little bit about the technology that supports this. But I just wanted to give some shout outs because behind the scenes, while I love seeing a Bloomberg article and all these articles come out, I've had not only an amazing founding team that has supported me through this, but we have some real rock stars, not only within our marketing group, but in the larger community. So I'm just going to shout these names out. I want to give love to Altif, Martien, Gina, Headroom, Nando, Cryptix, Sebastian, who's been our loyal automotive ambassador for almost 2.5 years. I want to give a shout out to our new PR company. They did a really good job with seeding this announcement. And of course, Stargazer and the community in general. And I apologize if I left anyone out here, but there's a lot of folks helping us support this stuff up. And I want to say that it means a ton that we're all on the same team and you guys are killing it. So I really appreciate it. To that point, one of the first things that we're going to dive into to set the tone is watch this 3-minute, 45-second video that was produced to really capture people's imagination around some of the more technical stuff that is not as easy to parse out when reading, a standard that's 50 pages long and is speaking in languages that we all don't necessarily speak in. So I'm going to go ahead and get this started just to set this tone, and we're going to watch it as a group.
Autonomous vehicles are no longer just a vision of the future. Today, more and more mobility enterprises are researching and manufacturing these vehicles, also known as AVs. MOBI, the Mobility Open Blockchain Initiative, is the world's largest mobility consortium. Its vision is to make transport greener, more efficient and more affordable, reducing congestion and pollution while also making vehicles safer. Emerging AV technologies offer these possibilities, supported by Mobi's strategic research program on autonomous mobility and logistics. Constellation has paved the way for emerging AV technologies to reach their true potential. As part of Mobi's connected mobility and data marketplace, Constellation has co-authored the working industry standard for secure AV data communication. Autonomous vehicles rely on connected and on-demand ecosystems that collect data and transmit it to other constituents. This involves data communication between different mobility vendors and different vehicle components. Constellation makes it possible for AVs to make decisions quickly and safely by sifting through large amounts of complex data, some 40 terabytes per 8 hours of driving. By securing the data streams through distributed ledger technology, Constellation ensures the safe operation of AVs. Constellation's DLT expands upon the current capabilities of traditional blockchains by using directed acyclic graph architecture to scale infinitely. This cryptographically secures complex data structures in contested network environments. It is a highly resilient distributed network with no single point of failure. Constellation's DLT also secures the data produced by one of the core AV components, the LiDAR sensor systems. LiDAR is an active remote sensing method for measuring distances to objects such as other cars and obstacles on the road. It creates a 3D representation of the environment around the AV. LiDAR sensors are essential for the safe operations of autonomous vehicles. LiDAR data allows AVs to make quick decisions to prevent accidents from occurring. This technological development ushers in a new chapter in Constellation's mission to drive the mainstream adoption of DLT technology. Constellation creates an authentication pipeline with end-to-end security, making it easier and more efficient to process and secure LiDAR data streams in real time. Constellation allows AVs to make quick decisions by identifying LiDAR data related to vehicle component failures and potential collisions before they happen. Manufacturers are also provided with crucial insights into data analytics. Constellation also protects LiDAR data streams against spoofing, corruption and other threats. By securing the data behind emerging AV technology, Constellation supports Mobi's vision of a cleaner and greener world at a time when we are more aware than ever of our carbon footprint. This is the only way forward. AVs will drive the new world of mobility today and into the future. And Constellation will be there every step of the way.
It's a rockin' video that really grounds this in a meaningful way. So for those that are new to this or have been kind of keeping track of what I've been working on, Mobi is the largest mobility consortia in the world. And why that matters is mobility affects everyone. And it's why it's one of my favorite use cases to talk about how something like Bitcoin is going to transform the world of self-driving cars. You know, that's a big delta there for people to wrap their head around. They're like, wait a minute. And so when you think about autonomous vehicles, and I know I've said this a lot, but this is really important to understand, in order for them to transmit data amongst each other in an autonomous, decentralized environments amongst different manufacturers, they need a network or a series of networks in order to bring those together, right? And so then the question begs, who owns the network? Is it Amazon? Is it Toyota? Is it Google? And there's no right answer because no one ultimately trusts any of these institutions or companies to run the network of all these others, right? So along comes distributed ledger technology, and the good folks at Mobi, who are all ex-OEM or automotive professionals, came together and said, we finally have this esoteric elixir that's going to bring those hard issues to place, which are, if we have a network that's sharing data, how do we keep it secure? How do we ensure that if data is being transmitted from one vehicle to the next, that some man in the middle attack doesn't come in and spoof and cause problems, which would be bad? Furthermore, how do we make sure that the data has true lineage or attribution to whoever created it? All the way down to the sensor level and the manufacturer level. They want to know that if they're creating value within this ecosystem, that it's not being replicated and stolen and so forth. So these are very big concerns. And as everyone hopefully on this call knows, that blockchain brings to fruition the promise of not only immutability. So we now know that this data, when it's created, it's notarized and we're able to see who made that data. But now, since it is on an immutable ledger, it thwarts the possibility of any kind of security threats, right? That said, it's complicated, right? Because you have a lot of parts in a car. These are basically supercomputers that cost an individual more money than anything else besides purchasing a house. So there's a lot of investment and value into this, right? So Moby came together and brought three major constituents to the table. The OEMs, or the car manufacturers. These are the Toyotas and the Fords and the GMs of the world. The tier 1 and tier 2 suppliers. These are like the Bosches and the Denzos that make the parts for the cars to be put together and shipped. And then blockchain companies, those of us that are specialists in our blockchain technologies, and those that have platforms, applications, solutions, and approaches to distributed ledger to help with the orchestration of these two entities. So Constellation was one of the early members in Moby. And the reason why we went after it is because we see this not only as a great use case to commercially explain our solution, but there's a lot of data. It's a massive data play. And that becomes cumbersome as we learn throughout our efforts within our Moby exploration. So they have a series of different working groups that you can check out on their website, everything down to vehicle grid energy exchanges, to title transfers, to car sharing services, and so forth, all things that affect the mobility environment. And since, as you guys know, we're a small team, we had to narrow down what was the working group that we were going to jockey our way in to try to be a key contender within that group. And we chose the Connected Mobility Data Marketplace. And the reason why is because this is the standard in which data is collected from the various sensors and companies and then is exchanged in a secure way amongst the different constituents in an autonomous environment, whether that means vehicle to vehicle or vehicle to an exchange, vehicle to the cloud. I mean, there's a lot of places that energy is orchestrated to do what a car does. And so a lot of folks have been wondering, why hasn't autonomous, driving come to fruition? And it's largely because of that security and IP piece. So as those that noticed yesterday, it was announced that this standard has been completed. And I'm not going to lie, as you can see, the author, I'm one of the authors on both, not only the standard, but I played a large role on the business white paper. So did quite a bit of that, more than I probably wanted to. But my point is I've been very involved in this at the deep level. And so very excited that this thing is out. Got to be honest, it's one of the hardest things I've done in my career, and I learned a ton. And there was many calls. I had sweaty palms because, let's be honest, I don't know everything about mobility. But that's what they didn't want. They wanted us to know a lot about blockchain and work together to try to figure this stuff out. So those that can see here, this is for Moby members, review only on the left, so we're not going to get into details. They have not published the standard. The press release yesterday was basically say, hey, it's coming. And I think that we're looking at a date somewhere in April to release it. But I do think the business white paper is out there, so we can get a link to that. There's also an FAQ that we're going to supply everyone with in case they're curious about why this matters. Though I'm sure you can probably get it from this call, right? It's pretty basic, right? There's a massive amount of economic power that sits in one of these cars when you think about all the different constituents across the supply chain that come together to bring a product to an environment that takes more lives than just about anything in the world. Car accidents kill, I think, somewhere of like 1.5 million people a year. The only other thing that kills people more is accidental poison overdose or things that have to do with drugs. So it's a big deal. Like, us working on this is not just about creating new economies, but safety is at the forefront of everyone's mind because this takes a lot of lives. So this paper, we'll be able to push it out. You guys can see a little bit of the FAQs around the press release. And those that have seen us in the past talk about, like, what area we were looking at. We touched a little bit on what our place was within this working group. So if you think about all the different sensors, here I was on these calls every week, and we stripped down the car to every small nut and bolt you possibly could. And then even beyond that, stripped infrastructure environments in major cities, as well as what are these other areas in which a car needs to communicate with. So it's not just car in car or car to car, but it's also car to toll booths, car to IP enabled traffic signals, cars to cell phone towers. All these things play a role in the mobility ecosystem. So during the process, we all had to kind of raise our hands and say, hey, what areas of the car are we going to take on? And Constellation took on about, I think, 6 sensors, and the ones that we were really proud of and focused on was LiDAR, camera, and GPS sensors. So this little kind of gross screenshot to the bottom on the right there, that shows one of the sheets of the level of all the different sensor inputs and how we were able to defend how we were going to collect data streaming from one of these LiDAR and camera sensors and make it, put it on our ledger and make it available quickly with no transaction fees. So very cumbersome. And out of that, we were able to create a really great piece that explains how we're able to process and secure complex LiDAR data. So those that don't know what LiDAR is, I'm not going to go too deep into it, basically bounces a laser out to the environment, and the reflection and the time that that reflection comes back informs that sensor on situational awareness, right? But if it can be faulty. I don't know if folks have heard about the Tesla, that the LiDAR sensor hit like a beer can or something. It thought it was like a mirror, and it ended up causing the person to get in a wreck and die because it thought it was something it wasn't. And so therefore, by combining LiDAR with camera and GPS, when we think about interoperability of data sets, you're able to really create situational awareness in a way that you haven't before. And so we cracked the code on this and was very excited to share this and offer it up. That said, I just want to be very clear on something that I probably should have started with. We're not a mobility company, and we have no intentions of being a mobility company. We're not a LiDAR company. We have no intentions of being a LiDAR company. We are a infrastructure company in which we want others, and individuals and businesses, to build blockchain solutions and build cryptocurrency solutions on top of. So for us to do a deep dive partnership with a myopic partner or a customer would almost do us a disservice, as everyone knows we're a small team and we have to place our bets accordingly. So those that have been watching a lot of these videos and heard my mantra, we're one to many. And that's why working within the Mobi ecosystem allows us to create a splash around our solution and work with those that work with customers to be able to bring our capabilities within their workflow. So just wanted to explain that so people know where we're at here. This shows a real strong validation of our capability when you think about big data, right? And as anyone knows around the Ethereum gas fees, that what we're trying to do around LiDAR data in an open network just simply wouldn't work on one of those platforms. So very proud of this. I got to give a shout out to our PR team, our marketing team, for doing a great job on this rollout. This really does encapsulate that, hey, we're at the table with real players and we're doing real work in blockchain around a subject that's hot, anything autonomous. And it doesn't need to just be vehicles, by the way. When we talk mobility, we've done papers and research, as I've mentioned, with University of Massachusetts, Dartmouth, around socializing drones. All of these things have the same elements in common, right? And it's all around situational awareness, trust, and being very, very fast around edge computing. How are you able to create a consensus or validation at the edge as much as possible so we can avoid the slowness of sending things to central servers via 4 or 5G networks? So big shout out here. This is for everyone in the community. Get excited, because this is validation that Constellation Network is really pushing the needle here on this. So then the question is why this matters and what is next. So I personally am not in the business of writing standards for my whole life, even though this is kind of where we had to establish our credibility and really validate with true players that we have a solution that can create impact within their initiatives. We went after the consortia one-to-many perspective. And so part of that is like, I am not in the business of just doing research. I don't want to do research. It's required to get to the starting line, but we're now at the starting line. That's what we're starting to see in 2021. And so Moby has their working groups, but they also have this up and coming Moby technology stack. And this is important because if you think about us creating a standard like we did around data sharing, and I've mentioned in the past, if you're a manufacturer that wants to create a class 5 car that doesn't have a steering wheel or brake pedal or gas pedal, they have to utilize a standard in which Constellation co-authored, right? But great. So then they're going to want to be like, how do we get started? And so what I love about Moby is they're really accelerating into offering solutions that are kind of from a Lego perspective. And I mean that because there's a lot of use cases when it comes to mobility. So they're not necessarily trying to create hard and fast playbooks, but rather here's the use case if you want to transmit machine-to-machine data, and here's the trusted individuals that we worked with that helped us write the standards, and here's how to get involved with them from a product perspective. And I do see out of this that there will be really cool POCs and so forth, but our goal is to give our technology to the professionals with the guidance that we've proved out and validated it so that they can actually go and build these solutions. So this is moving into production, and that's a very exciting thing because those that know anything about the car or automotive space, it's slow, right? It moves very slow, but we're getting there. And so what's also cool is because those that have noticed, we had to select a few consortias, and we're still open to one more on the latter half of this year, is our involvement with Space ISAC. We're doing really great stuff there, as I've mentioned. Can't talk as much about the institutions we work with because they're pretty sticky about that. But within Space ISAC, I'm going to be speaking on a mobility panel here soon in the next, I think, 6 weeks. We haven't gotten the Eventbrite yet, but we'll send it out. And why they wanted to talk about mobility is because during our discussions around the sensors within the connected mobility data marketplace was, hey, all right, we got this GPS is coming in and it's feeding here. And the question was, well, what happens if the data is spoofed from the GPS sensor, right? And of course, this can apply to a lot of things like cell phone signals. Any type of an outside communication input could be hacked. But this was one that everyone kind of perked their ear up because they thought, oh, yeah. I mean, all of a sudden we have these private companies like SpaceX all over the world that are just blasting satellites up into space. And these things, it's kind of like maritime law. No one really can track or own any chunk of space. And if these things are conducting any type of signal that can be picked up by infrastructure and mobility, it could cause a lot of problems. I mean, all the way down to like food trust. Like there's so much that satellites handle. So when you think about like a layer cake, you have the terrestrial terrain, which is like infrastructure and cars. Then you have air, like planes and drones. And then you have space, you have satellites. And so our involvement in Space ISAC, they love that we have such a strong footprint in what's happening within the infrastructure play on mobility. And so we're starting to tie these things together about how space and mobility really are the hand to fit the glove. And then I also slapped in the IEEE because as we start to produce a lot of these different papers, and I say we as in Wyatt, naturally, of course, there's the standard that I co-authored and helped write, but Wyatt's doing a lot of stuff to really ground this into a true technical, meaningful level from a standards perspective. We're going to see that into the IEEE this year as well. So that's kind of on the external ecosystem, how we're going to be doing this stuff. On the internal, and this is where we're going to start to pivot over to Wyatt. So Wyatt, if you've been zoning out, it's probably a good time to start paying attention. You're coming up, buddy. Is we are about to launch a product that interfaces with the Hypergraph transfer protocol to allow folks to launch their own blockchain solutions, their own cryptocurrencies, and their own decentralized applications. And what I love about this process is that we're able to prove out the validity of this product by taking the learnings that we've done with Moby from these schemas we validated and start configuring those schemas within the state channel builder of this product, which is essentially which is essentially the business framework for how these companies configure their rules around their token economics, their data validation, and their blockchain scalability, and how it interoperates with either their existing legacy systems or other blockchain solutions or other networks. So Wyatt, I'm so thankful, and I want to give you a shout out because you've been a guiding light in many ways throughout my Moby stuff. I would get him on the phone every few months and be like, hey, am I writing checks that our asses can't cash? And what I love about Wyatt is he's a yes man, and a true yes man, meaning that when he says it works versus him being like, well, we can try to, make it work. And that's why I love you, Wyatt. So I'm going to hand it over to you. And first and foremost, we're going to dive into a first question, but I wanted to see if you had anything you wanted to say about this mobility stuff and the discovery of LiDAR and what it's been like over the last couple of years.
Yeah, I mean, I could just say a couple of words. It's really been a shining light in terms of finding, I guess, for lack of a better term, product market fit and an industry where, that is ripe for what, we've been cooking, I suppose. And, I just sort of try to evoke, sort of where do we really fit here, which is that, if there's a car that's operating on some type of, data feed, then the honesty of that data is directly correlated with the safety of the ride. So, yeah, I think it's going to be very important. I think it's going to really help define us and define a new chapter in the human story.
Heck yeah. All right. I'm going to be flipping your slides for you here and sort of the moderator. So why is a data standard essential, and how does this relate to data types and what we secure on Hypergraph?
Absolutely. So standards are really essential because they help us describe a context for which we try to solve problems or build new products, or at least reason about situational awareness. And regarding the transfer of data, the standardization in this regard would be focused on the actual format of the data, or rather just the transfer protocol used. So similarly, like in our traditional internet with the hyper text transfer protocol, which is really focused on maintaining links between lexicographical information that's stored on different servers that we call ISPs. There is an inherent lack of topological information in how data is stored and indexed inside of that network. So to create a standard that allows for a situational context of the global physical world that can be accessed by autonomous vehicles or decision-making machines that are mission critical, to use our military friends' term. We need something that helps us understand a relative arrow of time and order of events. And so, that's really sort of the technical limitations. And how this actually turns out is that we want to change the format and transfer protocol of the data that we're sending into something that looks very akin to the hypergraph. So, this is really going to open up an entirely new world for individuals to make data available, but also to share and incorporate other data into decisions being made by these, very, very sensitive, life-affecting machines.
Yeah, I was just going to add one thing on that mission critical piece, because that's it's a key statement. Because if you think about autonomous vehicles having to have a standard in which they communicate data, without that, how are we going to prevent this stuff? And so therefore, you can't really do autonomy unless you have that validation and security. So it really is mission critical. So how will this be expressed in the DAG terminal? For those that haven't heard this term, this is something we're starting to seed out. This is that product layer that will live between the Hypergraph transfer protocol and will be a set of tools for those to launch their own blockchain, cryptocurrency, or decentralized applications. So, Wyatt?
Yeah, I mean, so what we're really trying to evoke here is the concept of like a Uber terminal. So, as individuals want to manage their assets and their own sort of infrastructure, something that we would see akin to, like just EC2 and AWS, as well as understanding the financial implications of that infrastructure. The actual terminal itself is going to be, something portal-wise, kind of like that. And so the goal here is to provide for over time individuals basically implementations that are hyper optimized for certain use cases, such like plugins on like a WordPress website or whatnot. For individuals, perhaps just trying to set up a really simple web server for an online marketplace, the same way that they would do something with like a demo app of like Elastic Beanstalk or something. So it's hard. Apologies for the vernacular here, but there are just a lot of tools that have been implemented with a hyper-optimized version of some type of a product that solves a use case, and these will be available for individuals to begin creating and participating in the new data economy, either from some type of an existing like web store or pretty much however you could possibly imagine it.
So what are businesses that can be developed using this industry standard? I mean, this is a vast question. I guess it's more a better way of asking, or what are some of the favorite businesses that you can envision that would be most impacted by this?
Yeah, I mean, so I guess this is a little segue away from the actual productization of how this might impact us, and whether it's entrepreneurs or engineers or individuals who are just expanding their relationship with this new economy. But, basically like what is the other types of products, I guess you could say, that would be emboldened. I know that's not the right word, but just improved by some type of an industry standard. Basically, and this also, I'll just do a preface, which is it's really difficult to try and do productization exercises because it tends to become very airy-fairy, but I would like to sort of jump back to the reason why MOBI is important, which is that honesty in the input to autonomous processes is the difference between life and death. And as we've seen, this is very important, obviously not necessarily just for cars, but for the access of any type of data, whether it be, the protection of individual rights through HIPAA and people with medical records, for individuals' social information with GDPR and, our friends in Europe, or perhaps, even access to what's being sold on secondary data markets, such as to, Cambridge Analytica or Facebook, who have notoriously been manipulating our understanding of our reality by warping stuff and picking and choosing data points that support a narrative that isn't necessarily true. We've had this news described as fake news, and it gets used all the time when trying to create a narrative to sell a drug, as well as to start a war. So anytime where a decision is between life or death, and it's based upon having to understand factual information, this is what we change.
Yeah, I mean, that's, we've been talking a lot about audit trail, and I don't like that term because it's not a leading indicator. It's like you're pulling it out of something, and we're really creating those real-time alerts that are showing that lineage of what exactly happened at the time, which is going to make a big impact in insurance. In another use case I just want to share to get people's brains around how crypto fits into this, because I will always say it, I believe the future is micropayments and microservices, and crypto is really what's going to unlock the value exchange amongst these different networks. And a car, this is what I've seen in some of these proof of concepts working within this consortia, becomes a node, right? And the car has a wallet in it. And that wallet may not be the same type of wallet that you can exchange for USD, but it has a store of value that's specific to the economy pinned to that car. Like, let's just say the emissions tax. Every time I drive my car, and let's say I have a Prius and Wyatt has a Hummer, and we're driving in the same city right now, we both pay the same emissions tax, right? But if we were using blockchain and some of these microservices, you would be able to know that, like, hey, he's having a bigger impact because he's driving this much. He's driving more. He has a car that has, worse emissions ratings and so forth, right? And so what if I did things that demonstrably offset emissions, like recycling or planting trees, something that they can measure that actually was tied to the environment and how cars impact it? I could start to store value if I'm not driving or whatever And that sounds fine and all, but like, what if I'm going to work and I'm late one day and I need to get to work faster and we're working in somewhat of an autonomous network of cars? I can stake value from my car and other cars will get out of the way so that I have the right of way, absorbing the crypto machine to machine. And while this sounds like science fiction, you can look it up, and I've seen these test courses in DC where they have physical cars doing it. Albeit they're moving rather slow, they're exchanging crypto for right away based off of the rules that they're setting on behalf of the driver. So these standards really bring forth the fabric between isolated siloed data sets that don't trust each other. Just to add on to what you're saying there, Wyatt. So how does this impact other industries and create more confidence across other industries? As I think I touched on a little bit there, but like healthcare data standards and best practices as an example.
Yeah, I mean, I can really just say that anything where, data is, the decision, is the, forms the context from which decisions are made that impact life or death decisions, and also, the sovereignty of the individual to, engage in a life of liberty.
Yeah. I mean, and confidence is a word that is used in the DoD a lot. If they don't have 100% confidence, they don't do things. I mean, that's not necessarily true. I'm probably talking out of context here. I'm sure there's like 90% confidence, pull the trigger. But in some of these scenarios where they need to know that this data has not been augmented, has the complete lineage to where it's coming from, gives them that confidence to make decisions quickly. So, and it's going to truncate that speed to action or time to value. So we talked a little bit about state channels, the business blockchain framework. I think this is what we're just going to end on today. I know that folks have heard the term state channels a million times. We're going to continue to talk about it. I add that descriptor there so folks understand that state channels are the mode in which, or the framework in which, you configure the rules of your business and your economy to launch your own network or communicate with other blockchain networks. Wyatt, am I saying this correctly? And what would you add to this?
Absolutely. Sort of without getting into the technical aspects, the real aha here is that these, businesses, or rather, the aspects of a state channel that we refer to as a liquidity pool, which might sound familiar to those who've been looking at cross-chain solutions, is essentially the treasury of a organization. The decentralized aspect may or may not necessarily be individual people, but they are servers that are hosting a product or service. And so the ability for an individual to actually create every single aspect that's necessary to unlock the potential that they may have to create a new facet for the economy is programmable and available at the click of a button. So the focus here is to unlock the true potential of every individual to find what their real purpose is, and to find the financial freedom to make it come true.
Heck yeah. Awesome. Well, we wanted to use this time today to talk about Moby, what we're doing in it, why it matters from a one-to-many approach, why standards matter, how this ties into use cases that involve not only blockchain technology, but also cryptocurrencies in a very meaningful way, how this ties into space, how this ties into a lot of our other endeavors, and why our product is well positioned to help bring some of this a lot of this AV security to life, and that state channels is going to continue to be the focus for how this happens. So I'm not sure if we're going to be taking questions, but I can go ahead and find out because we have a bunch of Q&A in here. So I'm going to stop my sharing. All right, let's answer a few questions before we conclude. First one, is there any media from the GM Ford side mentioning us? Are there any plans to list on Binance? Not sure what that has to do with Moby. Is what DAG is providing for Moby and other stakeholders totally independent of IOTA, and what are they bringing to the table? So we're going to scratch the Binance question, which is hilarious that people keep asking. Is there any media from the GM Ford side mentioning us? I don't know, and I don't care. That's not why we do this. So hopefully they did, but we're going with this. So what is DAG providing for Moby and other stakeholders, totally independent of IOTA? So IOTA plays a role in Moby. They just decided not to play a role in the Connected Data Marketplace working group. So we do interface with that team. We have a relationship with them. But outside of that, what they're doing is independent of what we're doing. They decided not to participate in this standard. So yeah, that answers that. Would each car company that uses Constellation get a stake channel? What about the individual traffic light sensors and other objects within a contested environment? Great question. So maybe Wyatt, you can answer that. I mean, I want to answer, but I think you should, is around state channels and individual, like does a traffic light get a state channel? Does one company with multiple constituents within that? How would that go about from an orchestration perspective?
Yeah, absolutely. So a state channel, and the reason why we use the word channel is necessarily meant to mean some type of like a mode within a complex transfer of data, and that really comes actually from like the Fourier transform and how we encode information being sent in like an analog circuit. And so what we're really describing here is sort of one slice, one sort of individual, dimension along a spectrum. So we can think about that in terms of like light as we're looking at information encoded as modular waveforms across current inside of an analog circuit. Now, the whole kind of aspect that I was just mentioning before about orchestrating the organization of both infrastructure and individuals for some organization encompasses not necessarily just, namely it encompasses not necessarily just the infrastructure, but also individuals as well. And so, the actual question of, do we create an entire state channel for every single traffic light in some type of a situation? The role of what I would differentiate a liquidity pool from just the actual, technological definition of a state channel, which is defined by some type of validation logic as well as custom user data type, is that the the liquidity pool has the ability to interact with other state channels in the wider economy itself in order to create relationships that help, provide support in times of, network chaos. And so that can, be thought of as some type of a entity that, is user paywall or is some type of a relationship with another, set of servers to host part or all of your application at the time of some type of like a network partition where your cluster goes down. So this is really where this sort of arbitration of, litigious connections inside of our economy would be orchestrated through. And then the individual nodes themselves that, make up the actual state channel would be things like, like a traffic light or something. So a state channel in itself is a subnet within the wider ecosystem of blockchains. It is its own L1 protocol, just like Bitcoin, Ethereum, or DAG. And the goal here is to create, I guess you could say I hate the word optimal, but basically just create a domain or barrier between use cases and the infrastructure used to serve them. And that is really just the key to horizontal scalability. So I'm happy to add more to that.
Love it. No, that was great. Next question is, when's the timeline for level 5 AVs? When can we expect to see the first prototypes using Constellation? Well, those are two questions. Timeline for level 5 AVs, that's a loaded question because what's going to take place in Washington State versus Cairo, Egypt is much different. The Western world has infrastructure that allows for AVs to take advantage of much more than what you'd experience in a city like Bombay in a monsoon, right? The thing that everybody will laugh about when I say this, well, not everybody, but it's very real. We're going to see self-flying cars before we'll see self-driving fully AV vehicles at mass, because the air does not have that existing infrastructure that needs to be enabled, much like the air, like the cities that we're working in. So loaded question. Those that own any new cars know that they have some certain level of autonomy already. See those cars that park themselves and know that other cars are in their way, blind spots and so forth. So as far as seeing the first prototypes using Constellation, our goal is to demo these schemas by the end of this year, if not sooner. And these schemas will be directly tied to projects in which will go to ideally production. So that's why that Moby product stack was an important piece of our vision here. So we got 6 minutes left. Wyatt, I mean, this is funny. Can Wyatt explain, hopefully in layman's terms, the 40 data set stuff? I think this is fun because it's near and dear to your heart. So I'd love to hear your thoughts.
Yeah, absolutely. So in essence, and this is kind of, I'm not exactly 100% sure like what snippets were taken from what clip or something that's out there, but for anyone who's really interested, just take a look at the work in progress branch on the econ paper. There's a reference implementation in there. And so the whole four-dimensional thing that I'm talking about here is that basically, in order to encode topological information that is akin to, or rather could be used to describe an arrow of time in some sort of complex system, we need to actually create geometric relationships amongst the different data types that give us some type of a ordering of events such that we can linearize them and understand what happened at one given time. And so, the actual like process of how do we create these types of, points, I guess you could say, from like the traditional math sense, comes directly from something known as simplicial geometry and basically the creation of, structures, geometric structures of increasing complexity and dimension. So this is sort of how we create like a point in like a 16-dimensional space if we're doing differential geometry. And so what I actually did was for generative economics is that I, constructed, the space upon which our, DAG, a hypergraph DAG actually exists, in such a way that it forms, a surface that is, equivalent to a hypergraph, but also is able to encode this type of ordering of events. So if you take a look in there, you can actually see that like the basic rudimentary data types in which I define and use to show like the stability criteria of the economic system that comes out of a universe that's operating in those types of data types is actually like fundamentally built from the ground up using those like constructions from simplicial geometry. And so I'll be able to take that in the future in those constructions, and I'm going to be able to show some sort of like how the reputation model associates with that as well. But also just directly from the actual data structure itself, those primitives. And that's really important because the library that I used, albeit it's not exactly like a theorem prover, but the constructions in that library are exactly what were used inside of blockchain cohomology, which was peer reviewed and published. Generative economics, which is preprint, but is just about to be started to cycle around the journals. And so we had this code to basically back it up. That is, I guess you could say an industry standard itself, the library that I use. So it's really awesome because it gives another level of confidence in knowing that the stuff actually works out. But so that's pretty much it. And yeah.
Sweet. I'm proud of you, buddy. I'm proud to know you. All right, we're going to wrap this up, guys. I'm going to have Ben take us home, but Ben, give me a moment to answer just a couple more questions, then I'm going to have you answer just two quick questions. The first question is, marry me. That's not going to happen. Unfortunately, I'm already married, so go ahead and cross that one out. Will the Constellation team grow in size with the Hypergraph? The answer is obviously a yes. We are growing, but we're not looking to scale to be a crazy large business. One of the questions I remember a year ago, and it was mentioned that just because Constellation helped author the spec doesn't necessarily guarantee Constellation will be selected as a solution. Is still this case? Absolutely. We're an open source solution. This is a free market, and we are listed right now as the solution for big data within these ecosystems. And there's nobody that's pressing up against us, whether it's the federal government or our activities within Moby. So welcome to go up against some competition, but right now we're the only ones there. When is Diggles Space ISAC panel? We haven't announced it yet. We're confirming the dates with Space ISAC. I think it's the 3rd or 4th week of March. It has been confirmed that it's going to be Constellation, Kratos, and Booz Allen Hamilton. Very honored to be presenting on that panel. So we'll have more about that soon. So Ben, I'm handing it over to you to take us home. The two questions for you is, how about the new tokenomics? Can you tease us something? And what's going on with LTX news? You can let us know when to expect those.
Yeah, thank you, guys. Great job. That was awesome. Great explanations. Great way to bridge it all together. It's so fascinating to see it come together. Tokenomics are in its final phase. We've kind of blended what Wyatt has done on the mathematical proofs in generative tokenomics, combining that with a narrative of how that relates to the L0 standard and tokens. That will be distributed next week. We've circulated that to a few people. It's been warmly received. It's a powerful document that really blends everything that we're doing at Constellation into our ecosystem. So very excited about that. Tomorrow, we will be announcing a APY program for Lattice, which we're very excited. There will be more information distributed next week. And gosh, like what else? I forget. I think over the next couple of weeks on the Hypergraph Hour, we're going to start bringing in some more guests. I know we've been saying that, but I'd love for more of these conversations where we're blending in the technology with the business and how that impacts the creation of L0 applications. So more of that narrative will really come through. So great job today, guys. Thank you.
Yeah, appreciate it. All right, everybody. See you all next week. Who's presenting next week? Do you know?
We will have an update on that.
Yeah. Sweet. All right. Well, let's everybody have a wonderful afternoon or evening or morning, wherever the heck you're at. And appreciate everybody's passion around this. And let's go, baby. Thank you so much.
Thanks, guys. Great job.